All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. This is a birds of a feather, really, discussion of canonical resource management infrastructure IG and the use cases that the IG supports and what we want the IG to support. I'm Kaney Rhodes.
Ryan Kaney.
And Nikolai Ryzhikov.
Yeah. I thought we'd start with just a brief tour of CRMI if you're not familiar with it. The Canonical Resource Management Infrastructure Implementation Guide was named by 3 different committees. What it's focused on is canonical resources. So these are resources like structure definition, value set, code system, library. They're the knowledge artifacts in FHIR. And they go through a life cycle. They all have like a publication status that goes from draft to active to retired. And they go through this publication cycle, and how do we consistently manage that publication cycle? How do we make sure that we are supporting consistent use so that we can share them? And the ultimate goal of the CRMI is to enable a knowledge ecosystem. So you have a knowledge artifact ecosystem. Just like you can freely exchange value sets today with terminology servers, we want to be able to do that with resource level interactions with libraries, profiles, all of the canonical resources. So one of the main things that it does is set up this whole artifact lifecycle. It talks about there are threats detected. It talks about authoring, the status, artifact identity, so how you establish the URL. It talks about versioning, provides kind of best practices for supporting that versioning, aligned with, so this is an R4 IG, but it's also aligned with where things are going in the R5 and R6 space to try to make sure that we have a glide path there and that we're doing things consistently across versions. It also establishes the profiles for the different phases of life cycle. So you'll hear things like shareable, computable, publishable, and executable, and these are focused on the different phases of content management. And the last thing that it focuses on is these capabilities. We define an artifact terminology service, just focused on providing terminology, value sets, code systems, concept maps to knowledge artifacts and making sure that we can consistently expand value sets that are published with knowledge artifacts. And then a general artifact repository, so the same idea, but for things like libraries and measures and plan definitions. So that's the CRMI. Mm-hmm. So next is like, what are the use cases?
Yeah, and there are plenty other use cases we see, because it's called like canonical resource management infrastructure. So, and for example, for FHIR servers, we do want to manage like structure definition and profiles. And there are scenarios when we need dynamic REST API to discover profiles, like getting all dependencies for profiles. So, and I would love to see that Simplifier will do support REST API, so I can query one profile with all dependencies, all this stuff. Yeah. So another area, for example, we're working on SQL on FHIR, so the view definition is going to be like canonical resource. So we need a standard way to manage this knowledge artifact. The questionnaire and stuff is another. So it looks like it can be like the scope can be broadened to like manage all canonical resources, but then we have the problem with the packages.
Yeah, so one of the biggest areas of tension I see is, I don't know who invented FHIR packages, but they're not REST. They don't follow the same like CRUD operations that we see when we have a FHIR server. And that kind of complicates things because we have situations where FHIR packages, which are similar to NPM packages, are very useful for distributing these things. But then there's other use cases, like you said, where you want to use REST. So we have there's a tension here. And we tried to strike a balance in this IG. I don't know if we did, but we tried to.
Well,
you want this one?
Well, I'm actually going to go to a place in the IG so I can. So one of the operations we define is this package operation. The idea of a package operation is that you give it an artifact, and what you get back is a bundle with that artifact and all of its dependencies gathered up, like Nikolai was talking about. You have, like, if you want a profile, then it will give you that profile, any extensions that that profile makes use of, all the value sets that are referenced. And the package operation, you can invoke it on any of the knowledge artifacts, including an implementation guide. And so the idea is that if you invoked it on an implementation guide and you passed true for this, there's a parameter, sorry for the scrolling, but there's a parameter for package only, right? And that basically says, give me the implementation guide, all of its dependencies, but only the packages. So stop at the package boundary. So that's basically a bundle representing that implementation guide. And then if you ask for that in the NPM media type, gzip plus or whatever it is, then in theory, you could actually just pass the package, the NPM package for that IG as the result of that package operation. So that's one way we've thought about maybe supporting the interchange between package and the package operation.
Question. Enlighten me, I'm not that much into the whole profiling stuff, but more on the implementation side. Does an NPM package always have to equate the scope of an implementation guide? Or is it just a packaging mechanism? So anything that could be, if I have my artifact bundle, right, the RESTful manner according to this implementation guide, then any of those bundles could be expressed as an NPM package if I wanted to do that.
That's right. There is no actual FHIR resource type that is a FHIR package. But the closest thing, I think, is the implementation guide resource. But you're right.
But this
So
is
that's
more a question to those
that's-
people that are using NPM packages. Is there anything that...
Do you mean
would-
FHIR packages?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
NPM packages, you have whatever you want to call them. Because we call our FHIR bundles, there is a dollar package operation. So the word package is a bit overloaded now. So I'm using NPM packages and bundles to distinguish between the two. Maybe you have other terms. But it's more a question, people that currently use NPM packages, would it sort of conflict with their current use of NPM packages if we started basically creating semi-random bundles and just junk them into an NPM package? If nobody sees an issue with that,
No, I think there's
then
two.
there is no
there's-
direct relationship with
yeah,
the implementation
I-
guide anymore.
Oh, no, Brian, you go first.
So I was just going to say that I think there's different use cases. A lot of the current like IG publishers, FHIR Sushi, a lot of that tooling, it's quite convenient to have FHIR packages. You can list them as dependencies, and it kind of just works. But then there's other use cases, like if I'm running a quality measure or a guideline or something, I might have terminology that has never existed in the FHIR package to begin with, but I still need to get that into some form so that my execution environment can make sense of it.
Yeah,
Oh, you have a mic.
I think it's also very important to differentiate between NPM packages and FHIR packages. The FHIR packages are essentially NPM packages, but NPM packages are an ecosystem for the JavaScript toolchain, and you're expected to have JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever types of things in them. Right now, FHIR packages are, I think all of them that are published are only published based on IGs, and I don't know if someone from FHIRly can answer that on the simplifier, but in the registry, every FHIR package you can find is an IG today. Now, if we generate them on demand,
Right.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the case that they have to be based on an implementation guide, but they all are today, yeah.
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, look, my question was also, doesn't this also relate to, like, what's the source of truth of these things and where the source of truth of these things get stored? Because, I mean, you're going to have some of this stuff coming through from, like, a Git repository that has some sushi in it that ends up becoming this npm fire package, and then you're going to have other things that are kind of, live in a fire server that's the authoritative source of truth of that thing. And actually even how you do find out what the authoritative source of truth of one of these things is. Like there's the terminology infrastructure. I don't know if you guys have seen that stuff. I'm sure you have. To figure out, and register what the authoritative sources of truth are for the terminology for these tool chains. I guess there's a similar problem for a bunch of these resources as well.
Yeah, and so there's two things to say there. One is there is an extension. I don't know whether it's been defined yet, but FHIR has approved the definition of it for package source, which lets you say for any given artifact, what is the package it was defined in. And, in the ideal world, that corresponds to the base canonical, but that's not always true, right? And so you can use this package source to actually identify exactly where it was published with the package. And then the second thing I'll say there is that, yeah, absolutely, the authoritative source and the patterns that are being established there in value sets, we want to use, right? Generalize that pattern to work with any knowledge artifact instead of just value sets, because that's exactly the same problem. Yeah.
If I can add one more thing too, I think we're just a little behind where they are in value sets on that front, because the package names are rooted like that. So like the HL7.FHIR packages, those are authoritative according to what HL7 publishes. And so no one else is allowed to publish an authoritative package in that space. It would be great if we had scopes. We don't have scopes, but we at least have naming patterns. And so I assume that infrastructure will eventually get in there as well.
Yeah.
Scopes are coming though.
I'll believe it when I see it.
There's early, Sushi has support for it now, and at least initial support for it.
Okay.
They don't do anything yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, my question was the same thing. What is the source of truth? And it kind of got answered there. So I'll just say there are some, in private, we'll call it knowledge authoring, there are some people creating NPM packages that are not IGs, not in the like FHIR IG type sense, if you will. So that is out there, and it really hasn't surfaced publicly yet, but it is going on. So we're going to have to account for that, and then I would also ask, in that case where you have dynamically requested an NPM package, is the expectation that that will go live in another artifact repository somewhere, or what is the home for that thing?
I don't know. In my head, the only use case for this operation, returning an NPM package, is the implementation guide use case.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because otherwise, you're in a repository and you just want the bundle of resources. Like maybe there's like a mirror use case or something like that where you've got an internal repository and you want to get stuff and expose it, and you've got a framework for like packaging things up based on their artifacts. But the point of this operation is that you don't know at author time what the actual package deployment is going to look like. You don't know what measures, organization X is going to want to run. They could run any of 60, and they're going to pick the ones they want to run. And so they want a package that's focused on just that content. The other use case is guidelines, and running a guideline in a resource-constrained environment. You don't want to have to download the entire FHIR core package. You just want the things that are referenced by what you need in order to run. So there's some memory and space constraints there, all of that. And to me, those aren't NPM packages. That's just delivering a bundle of artifacts, and then you deal with those in your environment.
The pattern we worked out is
The pattern we worked out is during publishing, we actually just store the tarball and then take everything out of the tarball and store it on a FHIR server. So we have, for distribution, we have both the and it's like on an artifactory even. So we have like the NPM API, and then we have a FHIR server effectively to implement the $sign package operation.
And for me, like NPM, it's still implementation detail. Yeah, so so there's a logical packages we may talk, and the packages for distribution. And I think like we sometimes mix this. So the NPM style, it's like a way to distribute packages and set up the dependencies and dependencies resolution, but it is not essential. So I can imagine like that this bundle and some dependencies can be set differently. Yeah, so IG resource and stuff like this. So I don't think that we should like stick to NPM package. Yeah, there's a logical package, and this is my question. Yes, because most of people working on IG and on a project style. So you have an IG. It's a project. It has one version for all canonical resources inside. And it has a life cycle which attached to all the resources inside this project. And I do publish all these resources at once. And you can simulate this using the current CRMI API, but it still looks a little bit not natural. Yeah? So maybe I can imagine like project-oriented API as well. So I do have like, I don't know, package/package ID, and then I'm putting all my canonical resources inside, and I have one operation, publish my package. And this is logical package. This is not physical package. Yeah.
What is your source of truth? What is your source of truth for a logical package at a particular version? Is it like the Git repo or?
I think it's up to you. So I can imagine like tools to design IG dynamically, so you don't have any GitHub repo at all. So let's imagine you have a nice UI to create the FHIR structure definitions and value set, like visual designers, and the CRMI API is attached to it. So you're designing your IG and then pushing the button, and you publish the package. I don't know, into different places. So you start serving package through REST API. So why it should be GitHub repo? I understand that. Yeah. Okay. So the current the build cycle is done like this, but not all packages done like this. Yeah. Then you can go and do something in Simplifier. It's not backed by. Yeah.
I'm going to steal this one or trade back and forth because I do want to push back a little, and actually it leads into a question I want to ask anyway, that right now the dependency tree only lives as a FHIR package artifact in the NPM package as dependencies. So if we...
That's bad, yeah?
Yeah, I agree it's bad, but I agree it's what we have.
We don't have a logical resource to express these dependencies.
I don't think that's true. It lives in the depends on elements of the implementation guides.
Not always. The depends on is very new. If you look at what's published, you could theoretically go through and trace all of the dependencies and say, okay, well, this is inherited from this other profile and things like that, but you have to go through artifact by artifact. And the really tricky part, and that's what I was going to ask about, is there are some number of IGs that did that without version pinning. So the only place you can discover the version is based on the dependency tree in the FHIR NPM package. And I was going to ask
I did not know that.
Yeah. So.
Maybe this is dynamic.
That's a bug.
It is not bug.
But it's a published bug.
But it's a published bug. Can there be, well.
We had a whole session about this in Dallas.
It's pinned?
No, it's not pinned. And so that's
That's
why
kind of dynamic resolution.
Well, no, because it is. It's pinned by the package. Because if
Right.
you published, when you published your package, if you were depending on,
So
if you published your package and you said this depends on, I inherit from US core patient, this is a simple one, but you didn't put a version, your package says I was depending on US core 3.1.1. Your profile just says US core patient. So you need the package context to know that at the time I published, that was US core 3.1.1.
but doesn't the implementation guide sorry.
Yeah.
Doesn't the implementation guide in that case have a version in the depends on?
No, because it's the author's choice. The author, in the IG
Like at
resource,
what point, are you saying that the publisher published packages without requiring a version in the depends on and allowing like profile references to profiles that were not in depends on? Because I didn't.
Well,
Like I knew about
Yeah.
like the canonical versions throughout the IG
Yeah.
typically don't have.
What I'm saying
versions.
is you can have multiple versions of US core in scope, and you can have a profile that inherits from US core patient. And there's a dependency resolution path you have to go through to figure out which version of US core patient you actually resolve in the profile.
because it's based on the
Dependency
package
tree.
of the profile.
Yes.
Right. The owning,
Yes.
like the package source for that profile.
Yes. And you
the
have to
version
navigate.
of the depends on,
Yeah.
but it's still in the implementation guide, right?
Well, you have to start you have to start wherever you are in the tree and go down. Because when this package was published, it might have only had US Core 3, but in my package up here, I have 3 and 6. And so I have to know that this was defined only in a context scope that had 3, even though 6 is now in scope.
Fair enough.
And then I'll shut up.
Fair enough. Okay, so no, this leads right into one of the other, like, I think really important aspects of CRMI, which is unversioned canonicals. So where did I put that page?
Terrible idea, it should not exist.
Brent, can I ask a question in between?
It's in table of contents now.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Start asking.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
My question is, you keep talking about IGs and then the artifacts being part of that. But I know that we have a lot of projects on Simplifier where they don't use the implementation guide publisher, so there's no actual IG resource. But we do have packages for those projects because they're official releases of the artifacts. Are you proposing with this that every package has to have an IG attached to it?
Right, I mean, it's what he was saying, like, there is no representation in FHIR of a FHIR package. And the IG implementation guide resource type is the closest thing, so that's what we're kind of using right now.
Yeah, but the projects that I mentioned, they don't have.
Yeah, the
an
question,
IG
why
resource.
do you need it at all? Yes, because, for example, if you're talking about dependency trees, so like having logical dependency, you may use IG resource to say, okay, I'm dependent on US core. But if you just publish research parameters or value sets, which doesn't have any dependencies, but value sets will have, yeah. So at least they may be in the same package, yeah. Maybe you don't need IG, or maybe you need, because here's a problem, yeah. So
You want to get rid of FHIR packages.
yeah, because so we have two unique names now. Yes, so one which is go through packages, and another which is like through URL. Yes, so
I don't want to get rid of packages because I like the fact that it kind of is a release of what we've done. And I have my implementation guide on my website somewhere that's not in an IG resource, but I still have dependencies because I have a project that depends on the Dutch core package, for example.
Yeah,
You
but
might depend on things that are in no package. You might depend on a value set that's been published outside of
Well,
any package.
Right, and
Maybe,
that you don't
but
have
you
control over.
want to. You want to still make clear what you depend on, I think, and that can be done through the dependencies in my package.
It can't that's, so the thing is that it really can't be done through the dependencies in the package. One, for the case that Gino's talking about, but two, in general, if you don't have control over the target, right, you can download the value set, but you can't change its definition. You can say, I depend on this value set. And in your reference, you can either say, I depend explicitly on a version of that value set, or, ta-da, Artifact Manifest will let you actually say what version of the dependencies you have. So that way, like, for example, if you expand a value set that is a grouping value set, you can't change that value set. You can't, like, go into the VSAC and say, okay, pin the versions you care about. But you still need a stable expansion of that. So what you have to do is say, for the versions that are in that grouping value set, for the value sets that are in that grouping value set, a manifest will let you say what version you used at that time, what version was most recent at that time. And so this basically is like a package JSON file for in FHIR representation. And so in your in all of your artifacts, wherever you have a reference to a canonical, if it's not versioned, then you can put that canonical with the version you care about as part of a release process into an artifact manifest.
Is it resource or logical?
It's a
model?
library,
Yeah,
yes.
it's a library. Okay.
And what it basically, if you're familiar with the expansion params resource in IGs right now, it's just putting that as a contained resource in a library. And then using that as, like, you can expand, like you can say, give me a value set expansion and pass that manifest. And then that gives the terminology server a way to know what versions of the value sets that it needs to use to do the expansion when it encounters them as it's going through. So that's how, and ideally, when the publisher actually publishes a package, it uses this same mechanism to go collect all of these things that are right now implicit and only implied by the version of the depends on in the implementation guide. It can actually go collect them and explicitly say, for all these things that I referenced, this was what I published with because this was the version that was public at the time. So that's one of the main things about CRMI.
But we still have a problem, yes? So we have this package infrastructure, and we do have this kind of theoretical idea of unique namespace of all canonicals with the URLs and versions. And yeah, and we should make these two live somehow together, because in the package ecosystem, you may think that the unique ID could be like package name, package version, and plus URL plus version. In the ideal world, it's just URL and version, yes, so that every canonical is unique in a global namespace. But we want to make dependencies based on packages. Or sometimes.
Wait, you wanted to get rid of packages.
Yeah, but we do have a packages, so they should be somehow unified with the CRMI.
So I'm not sure I'm following, because so the URL, like a canonical URL, is the globally unique identifier for that thing. And there are cases where the same URL will appear in multiple packages.
Yeah.
Right? That's actually by design, right? So that you can introduce a value set with a THO base, publish it in your IG while it's draft, and then actually move it to THO. The URL doesn't change, but that actually might move into THO instead of being part of your package once it's matured. But it's still the case that the version would have to be unique. So the combination of the URL and that version, maybe at version 1, it's in your package, but at version 2, it gets published in THO, and then it just becomes a dependency.
Or you may want to do monkey patching. Yeah, let's say in some published package, there's some error, and you just create different package with the same resources, but with a fix, and then just use it.
Gino says no.
But that's how you work with npm. Yeah, so you have a namespace in JavaScript of all the symbols,
Yeah.
and you have a package, and they're independent of each other. So I can change the real package I'm using, having the same symbols
Yes.
in my code. Yeah.
But that is utterly terrifying for me in the context of canonical things. Because then you have some context where a canonical thing is different than the canonical thing from some other context, and I would highly say I do not want that to happen.
So then we need ecosystem and a FHIR package, so that no one resource with the same canonical and same version published in two different packages. So we need
Correct.
some checks for all the packages, so that's never happen.
Yeah, and there are some things built into the tooling already for that. Because you're not allowed to define a canonical outside of your package scope unless you apply for an exemption and stuff like that in HL7 packages. Obviously, anyone can publish their own package.
Yeah. So I think that takes us back to something I noticed at the beginning when you were talking about lifecycle stuff, and there's recommendation semantic versioning.
Mm-hmm.
But the key thing that makes semantic versioning useful is a definition of what's a breaking change and what's a patch. And then I think that speaks to exactly this issue of multi-patching or technical versions, because you can have technical versions of canonical resources.
Yes.
And they're effectively changes that don't change the version, the business version, but they do change the details. So are there guidelines on what constitutes a breaking change or just a patch? And clearly they need to be type specific, because a change to
Right.
one thing is, yeah.
There's very general guidance in CRMI about that. Can be changed in a way that would alter the public use of its components or significantly impact capability. That's a major change, right? There's some very high level guidance about that. TSMG is also doing this in a very detailed way for all of the vocabulary resources. And I agree, I think that same thing should be done for all of the knowledge artifacts, to say, if you make this kind of change, that has to be this kind of version change.
Yeah, because then the other part of it is when you're doing dependency resolution, are you always providing the 3-part semantic version? Or are you allowed to say, well, I depend on major.minor or just major, and then have it resolved to the latest?
Yeah,
I like ticket, please.
Yeah, well, and I think in an ideal world, we'd absolutely be able to do that. I depend on one.star, right? And so it's fine but you have to get to that level of detail about what the changes are, and then there has to be governance and enforcement around the use of that versioning pattern. I mean, right now, that we don't even say, it shall specify a version, but it should be Semver.
Yeah, but the Semver is not really useful if all you ever do is specify the full 3-part thing, because it's just a convention for syntax then.
Right.
And we have to admit that in the ecosystem, we don't have control over a lot of that.
Sure.
Because anyone can publish whatever they want, and if they use dates, they use dates.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the restrictions that we were able to apply in FHIR packaging, is saying they will be Semver, because that's the definition of a FHIR package requires it. But when you talk about canonical resources,
Right. And that's we're trying in this IG to put that kind of thing in place.
Yeah.
But even with this one, we couldn't say shall yet.
Do you know the versioning page in the FHIR spec itself? It also has a explanation on semantic versioning and how semantic versioning is done in FHIR. And somehow there it says, within FHIR, we're okay with breaking changes when you change a minor version of your Semver. Cool.
Yeah, we
Just
linked.
Yeah.
We linked to it from
Not
here.
a great fan.
there was a lot of argument.
Hey, sorry, I have a question. I'm not sure I totally follow the discussion, to be honest, because I'm not that familiar with IG. But my question is, as a client of the IG, can I think about the delivery of the content as a transient process? It seems like that is the kind of what the problem is, right? Because if you have dependencies within sort of contents of different packages, then the only way for me as a client to be able to disambiguate is to unpackage those things and then to remember what version is what, right? Because sometimes I might want to duplicate them in different versions, but sometimes I can deduplicate the same resources coming from different packages. So if the package process is not, if I, after unpackage a package, I still have to remember some information about the delivery of that package, then that sounds to me like a mess.
Yeah.
Is that right? So if we can make the packaging, the whole operation entirely transient, then that's not a problem anymore.
So I'll say two things there. One is the artifact manifest is intended to allow you to preserve that information, right? So the manifest is what lets you know that when this measure was released with this version of these value sets. And the second thing I'll say is it's entirely possible that a system needs to support running multiple versions of the same artifact in the same system. Maybe that's not a requirement for some, but it's definitely a requirement for others. And so that's one thing that we are actually trying to support to make sure that, you can run like last year's version of the measure on your data in the same system that you can run this year's version of the measure. And when you're doing that, you're going to get different expansions from the value sets for last year than you are for the value sets for this year. And that's just like that happens today. And the way it happens today is copies. And it'd be great if that didn't have to be copies. You could still copy it if you want, that's great, but we want to support like actually being explicit about what those versions are and being able to actually do that runtime.
Or we can
Does that make
like
sense?
relax it and follow analogy with a code. So when we in any programming language, yes, in JavaScript, for example. So we do have libraries. They do have unique names inside the code. Yeah. So you say jQuery.something. Yeah. So and they are like URLs. And but we do have package names, which sometimes are not related to what you have inside package. Yes. So it could be like myfancycompany.something. Yes, and they completely independent. And maybe this is a good thing because, so you may have two libraries with the same API, which are compatible. And you can change one library for another library, or you can monkey patch, as I said, okay, so if there's a bug in this library, I can fork it, publish as a different package name, but with the same interface and use it. So the question maybe we should like distinguish like packaging completely from canonical URLs and just allow to have like duplicates in packages. So you build your dependency tree with packages, and you have a freedom to have like take different package, not just let's say FHIR.core, but some my FHIR.core with some fixes. It's up to you at the moment when you're gonna run it.
Oh, that's easy.
Okay, it's just
and part of that is problematic, and this is some of the things that we have to dance around in general, and we've talked about it in a few other sessions, that we have things like the process for resolving a canonical URL, and that is described in the FHIR spec and is in a normative section. So we want to dance around and be able to add things like this, but we also have to ensure that we're not breaking any normative rules we've already made. And so some of those types of things when we talk about like the process that you go through for canonical resolution, okay, we got to find the wiggle room, and that's, I think, some of these things is how can we improve those things, but we have to make sure it doesn't break the existing, and the existing is very intertwined with packages. So that's one of the challenges in this space. Just one. That's the only one.
Yeah, no, that's the only
Probably the only challenge.
So yeah, I mean, listening to this, maybe I'm understanding this wrong, but to me, really, the dependencies that you actually have are, if you create an implementation guide and you create a bunch of profiles and they reference things, then you've got dependencies on those references that you've made and transitively to the things that they reference, and some of which may not be versioned, which is a bit scary. Well, it depends on the context, but yeah.
They're versioned by the tooling.
Yeah, always scary. And so I guess when you have that moment of making a publication of a thing, you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to pin those down or whatever. But it feels like the dependencies for packages and saying I'm depending on that package is really just a shorthand way of saying I'm depending on these versions of all of these things.
Yes.
But it's really the things you're depending on. It's not the package. It's just a convenient way of describing a bunch of dependencies. Yeah. Is that right?
Hey, I get both. Yes and no. And again, this goes into some of the process stuff. So we also use some of those package dependency hierarchies in publication rules. So when we talk about, for instance, when you publish something for internal use, you're building whatever, you can point to a CI build of like the extensions pack. When you actually go to publish something, you can't, because the CI build is a dynamic version, and so you have to have a pinned version of that dependency. And then that follows through when you go through the maturity process and talk about like, I want to have something that's normative. The things underneath it also have to be normative. And so there's a lot of tracing that happens, and right now that's all based on the NPM dependency tree.
But wouldn't that be just, you know, those particular resources could have a version that's a CI build version?
They could. But
or maybe they should.
Well, yeah.
So that's a really important part of the content management lifecycle. We're at the 5-minute mark, just so we know. But what we say in CRMI, and this is just the proposal, and this is how like all the projects that we've worked on so far are doing this. But if it's draft, you can't rely on that content. If your status is draft, then you have no guarantee that you're going to see the same value for canonical. But once it gets to active, then it should be the case, and we think this is supported by the spec, like language, that for a canonical resource, for the same URL and version, there should be no substantive difference between loading it from server A and loading it from server B. That those are, and that's exactly what canonical means.
With the exception of the meta section.
With the like,
Any digital
that's why I
signature
said
to make it work.
substantive. I was careful. Careful to say substantive. Yes.
It doesn't have to be bit identical,
Now,
but it has to be substantial.
That's also another little nuance. There's a strict and a metadata. We have like a version policy that we introduced here, and if you want it to be the case that it is exactly the same thing, you can say that with a strict policy extension.
So Nikolai just mentioned signatures. Is there any mechanism for including signatures in the manifest?
There is a section in here about putting it in the meta section.
Outstanding.
That's fabulous.
So two considerations around substantive. One is that substantive is a notion that kind of exists at HL7 International as a standards organization. It is not a concept that exists outside that and is not super well defined for a lot of our artifacts. And so making an assertion that that's the rule without formally defining what that means doesn't buy us much. The other consideration is that there can be significant differences in representation. So having a structured definition with or without a snapshot, having a questionnaire that is or is not assembled. So there can be radically different behaviors in terms of how computably useful the content is, even if technically it's not substantively different. And I suspect a lot of implementers may find that surprising.
Yeah.
So what I heard is all snapshots all the time.
And that's part of that is what we're trying to model consistently with the computable versus executable. So yeah, I mean, what I said has to be modulo the fact that your instance may have expressions or expansions, right? You may have 10 different instances of the same canonical and version because that's how many expansions you have. So, okay, I think we are at time. We have 1 minute.
One last remark or question? Anywhere? Well, then your final comment.
No, I just, as a remark, because I feel like I've been Debbie Downer here, this is really good work, and it's really difficult space, and as I think is illustrated, a very complicated space, fraught with regulations and policies and governance and all this other stuff. And so thank you for continuing to push on it, and hopefully we can make it all simpler for everyone else downstream once we get all this kind of stuff resolved.
Yeah.
So.